What's going on, YouTube? It's Big Brother 749 coming back at you with another video. I want to make a quick video about how African students are being discriminated against by authorities while trying to leave Ukraine during the Russian invasion. And these African students are seeking to be refugees, and they're reporting how they've been experiencing racism while they're trying to flee Ukraine. And they're saying that they've been faced with guns, they've dealt with hostile guards, and they've been having problems getting buses and trains to Ukraine's borders because they were black. And just African students who are fleeing Ukraine, they're claiming that they're being discriminated against at a Poland border, and they're saying that they're not receiving any help. And Poland won't let them through their border, and Ukraine is having their evacuation trains only to be made for white children, white women, and white men only. And it's been said how the African men from 18 to 60 are also being forced to stay to help Ukraine fight Russia. And they're being forced into war. And I'm just going to give my take on this real quick. Now, first off, this is a fucked up situation that they're in. They're being stuck in Ukraine and they're being racially mistreated. And it's a very disturbing and sad case. I hate to see them go through that. They're being bullied and discriminated against all because of their race. And they want to leave Ukraine and they're being refused. And it's obviously racism because before this war, they were allowed to leave anytime they wanted. And now that there's a war going on, they're being forced to stay while the whites are being allowed to leave. And plus, the African male students are forced to help Ukraine fight Russia. I mean, they're just being used and abused, and they're just being taken advantage of. And this is like, the modern day slavery, basically, and though America's a racist country, Eastern Europe's a little bit more open and honest with their racism, just like America was back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And that's what these Africans are going through right now, legalized racism. And this is so sad. I mean, I put the blame on Vladimir Putin for this, for starting this war to begin with. And first we was talking about helping Ukraine, and now we're talking about saving Africans from Ukraine, because these Africans are being mistreated over their race, the color of their skin, which was something that was genetically passed down to them, something that they were born with, something that they had no control over, and they were brought into this world without a choice, and as they grew older and become more familiar with things as they go through this journey called life, they would experience new things, and they would have dreams that they want to fulfill, and they have plans and goals they would want to accomplish, just trying to find a place in this world, traveling, and just want to do things and just want to live life just like everybody else so they can be free and happy. But because of their nationality, and where they're from and what they look like, they're being faced with guns, dealing with hostile guards, having problems getting buses or trains to Ukraine's borders, and being dragged from those buses and trains, all because they're black. And I feel these African students shouldn't be forced to stay in Ukraine during this invasion, because by them not being citizens, you would think that they'd be allowed to leave. And these African students shouldn't be forced to stay if they don't want to. And the African male students shouldn't be forced to fight a war that's not theirs, because all that's going to do is cause them psychological problems and potentially physical damage. And they shouldn't be forced. If they volunteer, okay, but you shouldn't force them if they don't want to, because these African students are already being mistreated. And I think all those Africans just need to go home because they got families and shit like that. And just when we was feeling bad for Ukraine, and we thought Ukraine were the victims, since European countries tend to be more racist against other white groups and Jews, they're also showing their true colors when it comes to these Africans, when you wouldn't think they do that. And I don't know whether or not if these Africans had migrated from their home countries either because they wanted a better life, searching for better opportunities, or either if they did it because they might have felt less than and might have had this inferior mindset, thinking that anywhere else they go to is going to be better. But to those who thought that moving to another country to attend school would make them feel superior and better than everyone else, to where they're adoring Europe more than they adore opportunity. I'm just hoping that these Africans are now realizing that racism is worldwide. It's all over the globe, and this world is filled with anti-blackness. And I mean, of course, not every individual is anti-black, but there are just so many racist folks out here in this world that just have this problem with folks who ain't white. And these Africans need to know that they're being tolerated, and they will never be accepted in Eastern Europe or any other place other than Africa. And I mean, we talk about America being racist, and yeah, it is racist. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the only racist country. We just get more attention for the racism that's going on down here because America is supposed to be known as this prominent country, a developed country, the richest country in the world. And they should have came here for school instead, because we've had Africans who came here to America to finish their education. Because I remember working with this one African dude about 12 years ago who came here to Kentucky for school. And I mean, he no longer lives here in Kentucky. He lives in Delaware now, but and he was an older student, like in his late 30s, and he was here to study political science. And while all the other foreigners that I've met and worked with in the past were more productive, I remember how lazy this dude was, and how he refused to do any work. He wasn't as productive as the other foreigners that were there, and this dude was just lazy as hell. He'd just be chilling, sitting down, reading a newspaper while everybody else was working. And he'll also do things such as walking away, disappearing from the department we were at, trying to avoid work, and would just roam around the whole building just bullshitting around. And management used to get on him a lot about that. And he's been fired like 8 times until the union finally got tired of him and eventually let him go for good. And see, the thing was that he thought just because he was an African living here in America, he was going to be treated with royalty, and to be treated just as equally as some of the white employees down there who also didn't do as much work or any work at all for that matter and get away with it. And there are some Africans who think this way. And I'm hoping that these African students in Ukraine was aware that unless they were in Africa, they'll never be seen as an equal in white society, because us black Americans realized that down here. And this African dude who I was working with at the time just had this perception like he was above the rules. And he also had this militant pro-black 1960s mindset like, you know, I'm not working or slaving for no white man. America's a free country. And I'm like, yeah, but it ain't that free, because as minorities, we ain't got it like that. They already don't want us here anyway, so don't give them a reason to fire you. And that's why brothers are starting their own businesses and working for themselves, so they wouldn't have to work for nobody else and deal with racism. But until then, you still got to do what you got to do to support yourself, because nothing's free in this world. And even if he was a diligent hard worker, it still wouldn't be promised that management would have left him alone, because you know there had been foreigners there who came here for school, who worked their asses off. You know, they worked hard, worked and bust their ass, and was still being mistreated, harassed, and discriminated against. And of course, you know, there might have been black American students who dealt with that just as they would if they were in Ukraine, dealing with the same problems that these African students are dealing with. But at least if these black American students were in Ukraine or any other foreign land, black Americans from the U.S. would fly them out. So I'm wondering, how come Nigerian won't do the same for these Africans? You would think that the Nigerian government would have evacuated all of their citizens by now, because that sounds more reasonable. It makes more sense, and that's just being more responsible. Because while this Russian-Ukraine war is going on, these African male students are forced to fight a war when they're already fighting a war of their own, a race war. And these African students are attending these schools like Moscow State University, and some folks may wonder why didn't they just go to medical school in their own countries. I mean, I'm sure there's many reasons, like you know, maybe they don't have colleges in universities in Africa, or if they do, their colleges in Africa may not have the same benefits or advantages, I'm guessing. But Ukraine has a lot of African students and immigrants and other nationalities, and they often get mocked and shitted on, because I've seen the video where those Russian folks who were not identified, they weren't shown. We just only hear them talking and laughing in the video because they were recording. But they were mocking these Africans, giving them bananas, throwing snowballs at them, calling them names, laughing and shit. And that just wasn't right at all. And even in America, there's some whites and even some black Americans, some of them, who mock and despise Africans. And I'm like, how could a black person despise an African when that was where they originated from, unless they're a coon? And plus, some Africans had been assaulted and robbed in Ukraine, and they're being forced to be streetwise and to be cautious. But it depends on the region too, because I don't think all the places in Ukraine are like that. And they're trying to get out, and they're going through hell and discrimination, because I was reading where there was this 25-year-old Nigerian medical student who was trying to get on a train to flee Ukraine with two of his friends, when the soldiers pointed guns at them and ordered them to go back. And then there had been Nigerian students who had been pulled and dragged out of a train that they had boarded in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. And when they were eventually allowed to board a train to Medica on the border with Poland, they came across these guards who told them that Africans, South Asians, and Arabs had to use a different crossing into Romonia. And whenever they refused to follow orders, the guards put up barricades to stop them from crossing while allowing white people to leave. And when that growing crowd of Africans began to move forward, a soldier pointed a gun at them. And they're being forced to stay and deal with Ukrainians who treat them like shit. And I don't think all Ukrainians are like that, but there are a lot of them who are. And see, the thing is that these Africans are medical students that they're fucking with. And these racist folks may not realize that there's going to come a time when they or their loved ones may possibly need them in the future, when they're in poor health. Because when these Africans graduate from medical school and they become more advanced in their careers, these are folks who can potentially save your life. Because when you're taken to the hospital, you may get a Nigerian doctor. You never know. So are you going to refuse to get medical help and suffer all because the doctor's Nigerian? See, that's why you should never mistreat foreigners who are studying in school, because a lot of them are truly dedicated people. The majority of doctors I've had in life were foreigners. They weren't from this country. They came to America and they worked just as hard, and some worked even harder than everybody else. And they have a steady work ethic, and that's why a lot of them do better in life. And with these African students in Ukraine, these African leaders, really need to step it up and come save these folks. They're being a big disappointment to their own people by not evacuating them, because nobody is built to stay in these crazy, fucked up, inhumane conditions for a long time. Even the government of India was able to send help to Ukraine to evacuate their citizens, but Nigerian hasn't. Nah, that ain't right. And I'm thinking, if these Nigerian African leaders don't want to save them, what about America? How come they're not helping? I mean, yeah, I know countries typically save citizens of their own, but I'm thinking, America is often known, as the world's policeman, the world's Superman, since everybody wants to come down here. Just like when this Russia-Ukraine invasion first happened, we were talking about NATO and wondered how come NATO don't send troops to defend Ukraine. But see, Ukraine's not a NATO country. And far as these African male students, they shouldn't be forced to fight a war. Also, I mean, like I said, unless they volunteer, you shouldn't force them, because they didn't come to Ukraine for that. These are just folks who want to go back home. These are just visitors, and they shouldn't be obligated to stay. And no one should force these foreigners to fight for a country that ain't even theirs. And because that's Ukraine's problem for Ukraine men to solve. And Ukraine and Russia need to find a way to resolve that shit peacefully without involving anybody. Because Eastern Europe's going to make Africans fight their war. But had the Europeans ever fought the wars in Africa? Because there were wars in Africa, but a lot of people don't know that because the Western news media hasn't covered on it. They don't care about African wars or African people dying or getting hurt because the West don't broadcast that. So why are Africans expected to fight for white folks in Europe? Folks who were historically known as their oppressors. Did they ever come and fight for Africans, even when African children were being destroyed and torn apart? No, they just looked the other way. And this Russian Ukraine conflict ain't even an African war. Let those Ukraine soldiers solve this conflict. Why would Africans fight in a war that ain't even African? And that's why African folks just need to start building themselves a world of value and better opportunities in Africa. Instead of Africans fighting wars in Eastern Europe, they should be fighting for African prosperity. You know, they need to start building and developing better schools. And I'm not knocking Africans moving to other countries for educational purpose. I'm all for people wanting to better their lives and taking advantage of the opportunities that they have ahead of them. But what I mean is that I meant that as a way of them, you know, not having to deal with such craziness, such as this racist Ukraine shit. And instead of Africans fighting race wars in Eastern Europe, they should be fighting for changes being made in Africa. And Ukraine foreign minister has stated that authorities have set up a hotline for African and Asian students looking for help in getting out. And I read where a lot of them are getting out, but there's still a lot of them left in Ukraine, and that's good. And I hope that they all get out eventually. And I'm glad to see America is doing whatever they can to help these folks out, because they need to return home and to be with their families. And if they want to continue with school, you know, I hope they would come here to America, to where even though there's racism down here too, but it's nowhere near as blatant or cruel as Ukraine. Or if not America, then they should find a least racist country that's not going to be as cruel to them like Ukraine was. Because I was reading where France was welcoming these African students, and that's a good option too. Because after this Russia and Ukraine shit is done and over with, these Africans should think twice about continuing their education down there. But that's all I want to say, folks. This is Big Brother 749 signing out. I'm out. Peace.